Was the Emperor dreaming when the light first stuttered, or did he open his eyes and choose not to speak? That is the question etched into the margin of a scorched sigil scroll recovered from Terra's undercrypts, dated in a hand no longer human. When the Astronomican flickered, the galaxy did not scream. It inhaled. Across 10,000 years of unbroken war, that beacon had been Niam's unblinking star, a wound of light carved into the warp by sacrifice without number. It was not merely a signal. It was proof that mankind still mattered. So when its radiance faltered, no more than a heartbeat, no longer than a prayer unsaid, every soul bound to it felt the tremor. Astropaths wept blood. Navigators clawed at sealed eye sockets. Somewhere beyond reason, something vast noticed the pause and leaned closer. In the depths of Terra, the choir screamed as one and then fell into terrified silence. 10,000 psychers burned each day to keep the Astronomican alight, their lives spent like incense before a god who could not answer. On that day, the fire guttered. Not extinguished, never that, but dimmed, as though the Emperor's will had drawn inward. The High Lord spoke of solar fluctuations, of warp interference, of statistical aberrations. Their words were ash. Deep beneath the Imperial palace, mechanisms older than memory adjusted without instruction, reacting to a change they had been built to fear. Custodians felt it in their bones, a pressure like a held breath before execution. For the first time since the heresy, Terra listened and heard nothing coming back from the throne. Far from Sol, the consequences unfolded in silence and fire. A Black Templar's crusade vanished between stars, its final transmission a single word repeated until static devoured it, blind. A Forge world's plasma suns went dark for exactly 1 minute, long enough for half a continent to freeze and shatter. On shrine worlds, statues of saints wept ash instead of tears, and sermons ended mid-verse as preachers forgot the next word. The Imperium had endured worse rifts, invasions, apocalypses, but this was different. This was not an attack, it was absence. In the warp, where demons feast on excess and agony, a sudden stillness spread like oil on water. Predators circled, confused, sensing the door unlatched but not yet opened. Within the Empyrean, ancient things stirred that had not moved since the war in heaven. They remembered a time before the Astronomican, before humanity burned its way into relevance. They remembered darkness as a natural state. One such entity, bound within a labyrinth of null stone and forgotten pacts, turned its attention toward the thinning light. It had no name that mortal throats could form, but it knew the Emperor by reputation alone, a stubborn flare against inevitability. The flicker was enough. Across impossible distances, threads tightened. Prophecies written in extinct alphabets began to align. 1,000 cults, unconnected and unaware of one another, dreamed the same dream. A lighthouse sinking beneath a black tide, and hands reaching from every direction to claim what remained. The Adeptus Astrotelepathica recorded the incident as a great Obscura disturbance and sealed the files under sigils that killed the unworthy. Yet even in suppression, truth leaked. Astropaths spoke of echoes in their messages, as though something else now listened on familiar frequencies. Long-dead voices whispered advice that should not exist. A navigator house on Hydrafer reported a star that only appeared when the Astronomican dimmed, visible solely to the warp site. They named it the Pale Witness and swore it had always been there, hidden behind the Emperor's glare. The Inquisition arrived within the hour. The house was erased by nightfall. The star remained. On the fringes, Xenos reacted with an unease bordering on reverence. Eldar Farseers reeled as carefully tended futures collapsed into static. Necron cryptechs paused their calculations, recognizing a variable last seen when gods still bled. Even the orcs felt it, their wog. Energy stuttering as if confused by the lack of a clear enemy to push against. The Tyranid fleets did not change course, but their synapse creatures turned their eyeless heads toward the galactic core, tasting something new in the psychic void. The eternal war did not pause, yet every combatant sensed the same thing. The rules had shifted, and no one had been told how. Back on Terra, the Golden Throne did not fail. It endured, as it always had, a monument to suffering and will. But servoskulls recorded a fluctuation no magos could explain, a microsecond where the throne's output exceeded known parameters, followed by the flicker. As if something had pushed outward, then withdrawn. The Emperor's tarot was consulted in secret. Every spread ended the same way. A crowned figure facing a mirror, the reflection missing its eyes. The master of mankind did not speak. Yet the custodian swore that for one impossible moment, the air around the throne felt less heavy, less occupied. The flicker passed. The Astronomican blazed once more, brighter than before, and the Imperium exhaled in exhausted relief. Fleets corrected course. Astropaths resumed their chance. Official histories would later describe the event as negligible, a statistical tremor in an age of chaos. Monuments were not raised. No holy day was declared. Silence was deemed safer. But some damage cannot be undone by light alone. In the warp, paths had been glimpsed. In real space, faith had cracked, not broken, but chipped, enough for doubt to seep in. The galaxy remembered the feeling of darkness without guidance. In a forgotten archive on Luna, a sealed chronicle unlocked itself without human touch. Its final entry, written 10 millennia before the Imperium's founding, updated with a single new line: "The beacon may falter not because it weakens, but because it listens." No author was listed, no warning followed. Somewhere beneath the Golden Throne, something ancient adjusted its posture, as if preparing for a conversation long delayed. And far beyond the reach of the Astronomican's renewed blaze, the Pale Witness brightened, just enough to be seen. The Pale Witness did not shine, it watched. As its cold luminance thickened beyond the Astronomican's reach, fragments of thought drifted outward like spores. A veteran guardsman on the ramparts of a nameless bastion felt it first, not as fear, but as relief. For a single breath, the burden of belief loosened. The Emperor felt distant, less immediate, like a memory instead of a command. The guardsman lowered his laskin and wondered, treasonously, whether devotion was meant to hurt this much. Around him, others felt the same hollow easing and mistook it for peace. Chaplains would later call it weakness of spirit. None could explain why prayer tasted of ash afterward, or why the sky above the fortress seemed fractionally darker, as though a veil had been drawn that no one remembered hanging. In the Cathedra Ophelia VII, a confessor paused mid-sermon, his voice trembling beneath vaults carved with martyrdom. He had preached the Emperor's omnipresence for decades, yet now sensed absence where certainty once lived. The faithful watched him closely, reading doubt in the lines of his face before he could mask it. Outside, penitents beat their backs raw, begging forgiveness for sins they could not name. The ecclesiarchy would later record a surge in self-flagellation across 100 systems, an instinctive attempt to bleed doubt away. But belief, once questioned, does not obey pain. It spreads inward, quietly, until even the most devout wonder whether faith is devotion or fear sanctified by tradition. Among the Adeptus Astartes, the reaction was colder, more controlled, and infinitely more dangerous. A strike cruiser of the Ashen Wardens drifted in void silence as its chaplain recorded a deviation in the litany of guidance. The words were correct, the cadence perfect, yet something in the echo felt wrong. Veterans who had faced demons without flinching felt a hairline fracture in their certainty. If the Emperor's light could flicker, even briefly, what did that say of the oath sworn beneath it? In the Stratageum, a librarian dreamed of a throne empty not from failure but from choice. He woke screaming and ordered the dream sealed under pain of execution, yet the idea lingered, poisonous and persistent. On Terra, politics grew teeth. The High Lords convened behind layers of silence, each faction sensing opportunity masked as crisis. Some whispered of reinforcing the Astronomican with additional sacrifice, burning deeper into humanity's dwindling reserves. Others argued for restraint, citing signs of overstrain in the throne's ancient systems. A third voice, quiet, newly influential, suggested study, understanding. The proposal was shelved publicly and pursued in secret. Black vaults opened. Devices once forbidden even to contemplate were dusted off and brought into candlelight. The Imperium had always claimed knowledge was dangerous. Now ignorance felt worse. Inquisitor Legate Vale, Threx watched the shadows lengthen across the Hall of Judgment and felt something close to vindication. For centuries, he had hunted doctrinal drift, the subtle heresies that wore loyalty like a mask. Now the Imperium itself drifted. His agents reported impossible coincidences, cult cells dismantled before discovery, demonic incursions dissolving without intervention, whispers of a guiding intelligence beneath the warp's usual madness. Threx did not believe in benevolence. He believed in traps. The Pale Witness, whatever it was, had touched the Imperium's soul and left fingerprints. He authorized an investigation that would damn him if discovered, drawing upon archives sealed since the age of apostasy. On a forge moon orbiting a dying star, Imagos of the Adeptus Mechanicus encountered a contradiction. A new sphere model predicted catastrophic failure should the Astronomican fluctuate again. Yet hidden data streams older than Mars' allegiance to Terra suggested alternative pathways. Navigation without the Emperor's light. The Magos hesitated, mechadendrites trembling. To pursue the data was tech heresy of the highest order. To ignore it felt like willful blindness. In the end, logic triumphed over loyalty. He copied the forbidden schematics and erased the act from his own memory logs, unaware that something else recorded the choice. Across shrine worlds and war zones alike, loyalty began to fracture not through rebellion, but reinterpretation. Soldiers fought on, priests preached, fleets burned, but the unspoken question lingered. If the Emperor listened during the flicker, what had he heard? And had he answered anyone else? Dreams spread of a second light, softer, patient, offering guidance without pain. The Inquisition dismissed the reports as mass hysteria. Too many dreams matched too closely. Too many symbols aligned. Faith was not dying, but it was changing, and change had always been the Imperium's oldest enemy. The revelation came not in fire, but in ink. In a sealed librarium beneath Terra, Vale Threx uncovered a proto-creed predating the Imperium, written by hands that would later help shape it. The text spoke of the Emperor not as a singular beacon, but as a lock holding something at bay by drawing all attention to himself. The Astronomican, it claimed, was not merely a guide, but a blindfold imposed upon the galaxy. When the flicker occurred, the blindfold slipped. Threx felt his certainty fracture as he realized the implication. The Pale Witness was not arriving. It had always been there, waiting for humanity to look away. As alarms began to wail across the palace, triggered by systems detecting an unauthorized transmission from the Golden Throne itself, Threx understood the final horror. The flicker had not been a failure. It had been a reply. The alarms beneath the palace did not scream. They tolled, low and funereal, like bells rung for a dying god. Those who heard them felt confession rise unbidden in their throats. A junior scribe, hands ink-stained and trembling, knelt beside a cogitator and begged the Emperor for forgiveness, not for sin, but for doubt. He had felt it since the flicker, a thinning of certainty, like parchment worn translucent by age. The Golden Throne loomed above, radiant and cruel, and for the first time he wondered whether devotion had been demanded because it was needed, or because it was dangerous. When the alarms ceased, the silence felt heavier than sound, as though the palace itself waited for a verdict it already feared. Across the stars, war intensified without direction, like a blade swung in darkness. Regiments charged because doctrine demanded it, not because hope remained. On a world whose name had been erased by orbital fire, a lone sister of the Adeptus Sororitas dragged herself through ash, her armor cracked, her hymns reduced to whispers. She still believed. Belief was all she had left. Yet every prayer echoed strangely, returning to her with altered cadence, as if something else tried to speak through familiar words. She rose, bloodied and resolute, and drove her blade into the enemy, but victory tasted hollow. Faith sustained her body. Doubt gnawed at her soul. The pale witness no longer hid. It did not blaze like the Astronomican. It suffused, a background presence pressing against perception. Astropaths began to die in new ways, smiling as their minds unraveled, murmuring thanks to unseen listeners. Inquisitor Threx watched reports accumulate like a mass grave of data. Worlds claimed salvation through new revelations, then burned themselves out in ecstatic ruin. He ordered extermination after extermination, each one a confession of failure. Loyalty demanded action. Righteousness demanded ignorance. Between the two, Threx felt himself hollowing, a man shaped by a creed that might itself be a lie. When he slept, he dreamed of chains mistaken for pillars. In the void between stars, the Ashen Wardens made planetfall on a shrine world turned quiet. No resistance, no prayers. The statues still stood, but their eyes had been carved away with ritual precision. In the cathedral's heart, the librarian felt the warp recede, not violently, but respectfully, like a crowd parting. Words formed in his mind without sound, ancient and calm, speaking of balance, of veils drawn too tightly. He fell to his knees, gauntlets shaking. He had sworn to protect mankind from lies. Now he faced the possibility that truth itself had been the enemy all along. On Mars, the Magos who had stolen forbidden schematics activated a relic older than the Treaty of Olympus. For one forbidden instant, a ship translated without the Astronomican's guidance and arrived intact. The data sang with impossible clarity, navigation without sacrifice, order without a beacon of pain. The Magos wept machine oil tears as realization set in. Humanity had not needed the light. It had been trained to fear the dark. Before he could transmit the proof, red-robed silhouettes emerged from shadow, weapons humming with sanctioned zeal. Innovation died screaming, as it always had. The ecclesiarchy fractured along invisible fault lines. Some doubled their fervor, preaching louder, bleeding more, demanding purity through annihilation. Others softened, speaking of mercy, of listening rather than commanding. The schism was not named, but it spread like rot through the pulpits. On Terra, a cardinal vanished mid-procession, leaving behind only his crozier and a confession etched into its haft, declaring the emperor a warden rather than a god. The artifact was destroyed within minutes. The idea endured. In the depths of the warp, ancient structures groaned as if stretching after eons of restraint. The pale witness revealed fragments of itself through dreams and madness. Not a god, but a convergence, a counterbalance buried when the galaxy chose singular authority over equilibrium. It did not hate the Emperor. It mourned him. The flicker had been an invitation to share the burden, to loosen the chains binding reality to one will. Something on the throne had answered, not with words, but with doubt. Threx stood alone in the Hall of Judgment as the truth assembled itself like a weapon. The Emperor's great lie had not been his divinity, but his solitude. The Astronomican was never meant to shine forever. It was a temporary wound, a lighthouse built to buy time while humanity learned to see for itself. 10,000 years later, mankind had refused to grow. The pale witness waited still. And now, beneath the golden throne, a mechanism long dormant began to disengage piece by ancient piece, as if preparing to let the galaxy choose what it would become without a single light to follow. The galaxy held its breath. Even the stars seemed to hesitate, their light trembling as though uncertain whether to reach those who still clung to belief. Across the void, fleets shifted silently, each captain unaware of the hidden currents tugging at their destinies. On a decimated hive world, a commissar stared at the smoke-choked sky and recited litanies by memory, each word a hammer against the gnawing doubt in his chest. Every order he gave felt like betrayal. Every punishment delivered, an act of love twisted into necessity. Somewhere in the cathedral above, the bells of Terra's high spires rang unevenly, a discordant echo that mirrored the fractures spreading through faith. Across millions of worlds, souls both loyal and broken whispered the same question. If the light had ever faltered, could it ever be trusted again? And no answer came. Only ruin. The Ashen Wardens advanced on a forsaken moon where shrines had been desecrated and rebuilt countless times. Their chaplain's voice cracked under armored gauntlets, chanting the proper rites while sensing a dissonance that words could not banish. Each step forward carried weight heavier than ceramite. Each breath felt like an invocation and a condemnation simultaneously. Veterans stared into the hollow altars, seeing the ghosts of their brothers in the cracked stone, wondering if the sacrifices they had sworn to honor were nothing but part of a story written to keep mankind obedient. The librarian felt a presence in the warp, patient and old, threading its will into the minds of his battle brothers without breaking the veneer of command. They followed orders, they prayed, they obeyed. And yet, they felt the first tremor of rebellion not in defiance, but in understanding. Far from the front lines, on Mars, the Mechanicus observed the unfolding anomalies with a mixture of awe and terror. Data streams from the relic the Magos had activated reached impossible clarity, showing pathways for humanity to navigate the stars without the Astronomican, without sacrifice, without sanctioned suffering. Tech priests whispered amongst themselves in metallic tones, some weeping servo-oil tears for the centuries of devotion wasted, others calculating the opportunity to seize forbidden knowledge. Hidden sects, previously dormant, began subtle experiments, testing these new truths in silence, risking the wrath of the Omnissiah. The planetary fabricator turned a slow eye toward Terra itself, understanding that every choice in the following cycles would ripple outward, reshaping the Imperium's centuries-old hierarchies. Progress and heresy danced hand in hand, and no machine could predict which would claim dominance first. On Terra, the High Lords convened in a chamber stripped of light, their faces pale beneath vaulted ceilings carved with symbols of eternity. Each voice carried the weight of betrayal, of decisions made and unmade, of fear masked as strategy. Some argued for ritualistic augmentation of the Astronomican, believing devotion could repair what doubt had begun to gnaw. Others, more daring or desperate, whispered of restraint, observation, and a cautious acceptance of the unknown. Behind closed eyes, each imagined a future where loyalty was not a virtue, but a cage, and some even imagined the Emperor not as savior, but as warden. The debate ended with no resolution. The chamber's silence swallowed their words, but it could not swallow the tremor that now threaded through every system of the Imperium, the tremor of truth discovered too late and of consequences long delayed. A Tyranid fleet breached the edge of a human subsector. Its swarms slowed but not deterred by the faltering Astronomican. Synapse creatures hesitated, tasting uncertainty as the familiar psychic beacon that had guided them wavered. Hive minds shifted subtly, adjusting strategies to account for an anomaly they could not fully comprehend. On the ground, Imperial soldiers engaged in brutal attrition warfare felt the difference without naming it. Shots missed, charges faltered. The timing of the war itself seemed misaligned, as if the galaxy had paused to consider its next move. And above them, the pale witness glimmered faintly, a silent observer threading comprehension through the tide of blood and devotion, its gaze ancient, patient, and unbearably deliberate. Even the fiercest zealot felt a whisper of doubt, the first seed of fear masquerading as intuition. In the void, astropathic convulsions began to tear through communication networks. Messages once precise now returned twisted, laden with hidden meaning. Starships found their headings subtly altered, course corrections made without command, as if the universe itself were gently reshaping the flow of destiny. In one navigation chamber, a young pilot whispered a prayer he did not fully understand, the words a mixture of hope, fear, and confession. Around him, crewmen collapsed mid-task, their minds grappling with threads of truth too vast for comprehension. Some dreamed of the Emperor speaking directly, others of an intelligence older than the stars, a witness to humanity's striving. All awoke changed, carrying knowledge that could not be unlearned, bearing guilt for truths they could not yet articulate. On a shrine world scorched by orbital bombardment, a sister of the Adepta Sororitas walked among the ruins, collecting bodies and stitching banners with trembling hands. She whispered prayers for absolution, though for whom she could not say, the Emperor, the dead, or herself. Every corpse seemed to accuse her silently, every ruined altar a testament to devotion rendered impotent. As she worked, visions intruded, the pale witness reflecting moments from her past, her faith tested, her oaths questioned, her sins magnified by memories of triumphs that had cost too many lives. Her hammer fell repeatedly on sacred stone, each strike echoing through empty corridors, a beat for a galaxy suffocating under the weight of its own choices. She wondered whether obedience was the path to salvation or the road to annihilation. The Ashen Warden's librarian found himself drawn into a ruin beneath the shrine, walls etched with glyphs older than the Imperium itself. The warp around him thickened, pressing against his mind, revealing glimpses of ancient machinery, of beings who had observed humanity long before it had claimed a throne. He saw the Emperor differently, not as an infallible god, but as one who had bargained, hidden, and sacrificed endlessly to hold something at bay. In the flicker's aftermath, he understood that every act of devotion, every oath sworn, had been both protection and imprisonment. The knowledge burned, a psychic fire that could purify or destroy. When he emerged, the chapter felt his aura changed. They obeyed, but differently, as if their mission had gained subtle, horrifying dimensions. In the Hall of Judgment, Vale Threx pieced together fragments from Terra and the frontier. He traced the echoes of the Pale Witness through the warp, through the dreams of psychers, through the mechanized whispers of the Magos, until the pattern was undeniable. A network older than humanity, older than the Emperor's throne, threading itself through everything, waiting for an opportunity. The realization chilled him. The Imperium had never been alone. Every heresy, every rebellion, every triumph had been shadowed by a presence guiding the balance. The Astronomican had been a tool, yes, but also a leash, a measure to delay confrontation with an intelligence whose patience spanned millennia. And now, for the first time, the leash loosened. The final scene before the storm was complete in its quiet horror. Across the void, signals converged, corrupted warp frequencies, forbidden schematics, altered litanies, and dreamt prophecies. The Pale Witness revealed itself fully, not as a single entity, but as a convergence of ancient consciousnesses, one with eyes in every mind, one with patience enough to shape empires across eons. And just as the galaxy teetered on the cusp of revelation and annihilation, the Golden Throne shuddered, releasing a pulse of light that should not exist, splitting reality for a heartbeat. Fleets paused, soldiers froze. Priests fell to their knees, whispering names they had feared to speak. The first rupture had begun, and the consequences would touch every soul in the Imperium before the next sunrise. The pulse from the Golden Throne tore through the palace like a silent scream. Custodians fell where they stood, their ceramite cracking under forces unseen, yet the throne endured. Vale Threx staggered forward, eyes wide, clutching the fragments of Forbidden's text that had led him here. The Pale Witness's convergence bled into the warp, manifesting as impossible constellations of thought, vision, and presence. Each star in the void became a pulse in the minds of the faithful, a question that could not be answered and a truth that could not be denied. The sky of Terra shivered, cracked light cascading across spires, and Threx felt the weight of 10,000 years compress into a heartbeat. The Emperor, silent, immobile, yet alive in ways that made mortal comprehension laughably small, observed. Obedience and fear collided in every soul exposed to the pulse. The galaxy held its breath, and it was no longer certain whether breathing was allowed. On the Shrine World, the Ashen Wardens collided with the first tangible projection of the Pale Witness. It was not a demon, not a god, not an enemy. It was all and none, a lattice of light and shadow threading through the minds of every warrior, every priest, every spy who had touched the secrets of the Flicker. Blades struck air, Guns fired into reflections of themselves, yet none were truly harmed. Pain existed, but it was a lesson, a calibration. The librarian raised his hands, screaming, and the convergence whispered back, a chorus of 1,000 minds folded into one. It asked nothing, demanded nothing, and yet all were condemned. Soldiers fell to knees they had never knelt unwillingly, confessing sins they had long buried. And somewhere beneath their skulls, the first seed of understanding took root, terrifying in its clarity. Across the void, Imperial fleets quaked as navigational corrections became impossible. Ships collided with one another, firing blindly, yet none were destroyed outright. The Magos on Mars, witnessing his relic's guidance warp into unpredictability, tried to recalibrate, but the device resisted like a living thing. Energy coursed along the veins of ancient machinery, light bending again, until the entire system seemed to stretch into a single thread of consciousness. Mechanicum sects fell into fevered ritual, chanting calculations as though prayer could stabilize mathematics. They did not know whether they were saving humanity or serving it to something greater. Every cogitator screamed, every servo skull recorded. The future splintered. And above them, in the Imperium, the pale witness drew close, patient, observing every act of devotion as both testament and joke. On battlefield after battlefield, the Sisters of Battle threw themselves against visions of impossible foes, each projection crafted from memory, fear, and hope. Bullets passed through forms that mimicked their brothers and sisters fallen in centuries past. Each impact burned like regret, each scream an invocation. Faith became not a shield but a mirror, reflecting every doubt back tenfold. Chaplains, screaming litanies, felt their chants swallowed and respat in languages older than the Imperium. The lines between martyrdom and futility dissolved. And yet, within the chaos, courage persisted, not blind, not obedient, but aware, a raw and terrible thing that shone even when it might have been extinguished. They fought not for victory, but to witness themselves endure in the presence of something eternal and unknowable. In the Hall of Judgment, Veil Threx confronted the manifestation of the Pale Witness within the throne's shadow. It did not speak in words. It spoke in knowledge, in intuition, in the unbearable pressure of truth. He saw the Emperor not as a god, but as a warden, struggling alone to hold back a tide of sentience older than stars, a force that had never sought conquest, only patience. Threx fell to his knees, not in prayer, but in understanding, and the witness welcomed him without mercy. All the oaths he had sworn, all the executions he had commanded, all the faith he had relied upon, became context, not justification. And for the first time, the Inquisitor felt the full scope of humanity's insignificance, and the true cost of every lie ever told to preserve order. In orbit above Terra, the fleets of the Imperium fired without aim or meaning. Titans raised weapons against empty projections of their own fears, while void shields buckled under forces they could not comprehend. Navigators screamed silently in their helms as stars shifted subtly, pathways vanishing. The Astronomican burned, yet its light faltered, stretched thin across the immeasurable presence now entwined with it. The very geometry of space seemed to tremble as if the galaxy were reconsidering its arrangement. And through it all, every captain, every admiral, every soldier recognized that obedience alone would not survive this reckoning. Devotion itself had become a weapon fragile, dangerous, and possibly obsolete. On a ruined hive world, the last surviving sister watched the sky split with light and shadow. Memories of the dead streamed before her eyes as projections wove impossible patterns of pain and revelation. Her prayers were half whispered, half screamed, addressing no god in particular. She raised her weapon and fired into the void, and for the first time, she felt not fear, but the precise weight of freedom. The choice to act, the choice to doubt, the choice to endure. Behind her, cathedrals collapsed without ceremony, bells tolling in fractured time. The world itself seemed to understand the theater of sacrifice, as though memory and loss were sentient enough to applaud in silence. The Ashen Warden's librarian was struck by clarity within the warp's eye. The Pale Witness was not adversary, nor ally, nor deity. It was an axis, a constant, a counterbalance hidden beneath layers of myth and practice, threading itself through the Imperium's every calculation. He screamed, words swallowed by the confluence of consciousness pressing through his skull. For an instant, he understood the cost of every war, the meaning of every oath, the shape of every lie passed down as doctrine. Reality itself seemed to wait, breathing, listening. And when he opened his eyes, the battlefield was unchanged, yet nothing would ever be the same again. In Terra's cathedra, the Emperor's throne pulsed with a resonance that was neither divine nor mechanical, but both. Custodians knelt where they had not before. Chaplains whispered litanies that no longer meant salvation, and astropaths collapsed, eyes rolling with unshared understanding. Veil Threx, standing at the threshold of revelation, realized that humanity's light had been borrowed, lent by a warden too exhausted to explain, and that the Pale Witness had not arrived. It had always been present. Every act of devotion, every sacrifice, every war had been observed, catalogued, folded into a design older than memory. And in that instant, choice was returned to mortals in a measure terrifying enough to fracture sanity. The climax arrived in silence. No explosions heralded it. No demons howled. The throne's pulse aligned with the stars, and in that alignment, every vessel, every warrior, every faithful and heretic alike sensed the first real pause of destiny. Light, shadow, truth, and faith intersected in a single heartbeat. The galaxy shuddered, time fractured. When the pulse faded, what remained was a trembling expanse of space, war-torn and fragile, holding its breath. And far above Terra, the Pale Witness withdrew a fraction, but left a mark imperceptible to all but those who had glimpsed it fully. The universe had shifted. Something eternal had awakened, yet none could say whether it was mercy, judgment, or the first whisper of annihilation. The void above Terra had quieted. Stars flickered weakly through warp mist, as though ashamed to watch the remnants of what had been. Cathedrals lay in ruins, their spires broken and hollow, but the echoes of litanies lingered in the air, tangled with dust and memory. Custodians patrolled corridors emptied of ceremony, their footsteps measured, heavy, aware that the vigilance they upheld was now an act of remembrance as much as protection. Veil Threx, scarred and hollow-eyed, moved among them like a ghost, recording what could be recorded, cataloging the final whispers of an age teetering on oblivion. The Pale Witness had withdrawn, leaving traces of its presence as if to remind the Imperium that some truths are better felt than spoken. Questions remained, sharp as ceramite edges. If the light could flicker, did faith endure? And if devotion had cost everything, what remained to protect? On shattered battlefields, banners hung limply from ruined pylons, colors dulled by dust, blood, and time. The soldiers who remained knelt among the corpses of enemies and allies alike, unable to name grief or victory. They prayed silently, not for salvation, but for memory itself, for the stories of those lost to persist in the quiet between stars. A single lasgun, buried in debris, discharged with a spark and died, an echo of action unclaimed. And in the silence, the universe seemed to exhale, as though the act of cessation itself was monumental. The librarian of the Ashen Wardens traced sigils in the air, watching as psychic residue of the Pale Witness faded, leaving only the impression of something vast and patient. He wondered, had they survived or merely endured the will of something older than the stars themselves? On Mars, the Magos walked through corridors of flame-scorched data terminals, observing machinery that had sung with impossible clarity only days before. The relic lay dormant, its energy spent or perhaps conserved. Servitors crawled among cables, gathering fragments of schematics that no one would dare replicate. The Mechanicus had witnessed revelation, had touched comprehension beyond doctrine, and had survived. Yet no celebration erupted. Only solemn cataloging, a ritual of understanding that burned more than it enlightened. The machine god, silent in its perfection, offered no guidance, no condemnation, The Magos asked no questions aloud, but the eyes of his automata seemed to follow him with silent curiosity. What had they glimpsed? And what would they rebuild? Some truths, he knew, would be folded into worship quietly, not for glory, but for survival. Among the ruin of the shrine worlds, sisters of the Adeptus Sororitas tended their wounded and whispered prayers to saints whose names had been forgotten. They laid bodies in orderly rows, shrouded in remnants of sacred banners, while soft wind carried ash from 1,000 pyres. The light of faith had not vanished, but it trembled, a candle in a cathedral of stars. Each act of care, each small mercy, was a defiance of despair. The world itself seemed to mourn with them, as though the rocks and dust retained memory of the blood spilled upon them. A sister traced a sigil over a fallen comrade's helmet, and for a heartbeat, it shimmered with faint light, a reminder that devotion is not erased, only transformed. Even in quiet, the Imperium endured. Vale Threx ascended to the observation deck above the Hall of Judgment, eyes tracing the ruins of Terra's spires against the bruised sky. The pulse of the Pale Witness had faded entirely, leaving silence heavy enough to break the mind. He recorded the names of the dead, the locations of survivors, the anomalies that could not be explained, and wondered whether the Imperium itself had survived or merely subsisted. Memories of 10,000 years of service, 10,000 years of war, pressed upon him like chains, yet he felt a weight lift with the final fading of the presence. Perhaps endurance was enough. Perhaps survival was its own justification. Or perhaps all that remained was witness, a quiet act of remembrance for the ages to come. In orbit, void fleets drifted, hulls scarred, shields dimmed, engines silent except for the hum of life support. Commanders sent reports, even as they realized the reports mattered little, carried as echoes into a galaxy now whispering of possibilities it had never known. Navigators looked into empty star lanes and felt hesitation, the first in a millennia-long career of certainty. Orders were issued, received, and forgotten. Even in command, the illusion of control had shattered. And yet, some measure of purpose lingered in the slow rotation of planets, the gentle turning of moons, and the soft pulse of remaining warp signals. The galaxy exhaled, slowly, reluctantly, carrying with it the weight of all that had been lost, and all that would never be understood. On a distant world scorched by orbital bombardment, a single remembrancer recorded images of the ruined cathedral, the shattered banners, the ghosted lines of soldiers long dead. Each page, each scrap, each sketch was a prayer of its own, a confession to the universe itself. She wrote of silence, of courage, of sacrifice unclaimed, and of the questions that would never have answers. What was the measure of faith when the light had wavered? What was the cost of devotion when survival alone had become the highest virtue? She traced the path of dust motes in the waning sunbeam, and her mind understood that the Imperium's chronicle was not finished. It had only changed shape. The Ashen Warden's librarian stood upon the charred steps of a ruined cathedral, surveying the battlefield in the twilight after the storm. He saw the faint shimmer of psychic residue, the last tendrils of the Pale Witness's presence, curling and fading like smoke through stone. Soldiers and survivors moved quietly, tending wounds, covering bodies, mourning silently. Memories of the climactic pulse lingered, an ache in the mind that no prayer could soothe. Some whispered thanks to the Emperor, some cursed the silence, and some spoke to nothing at all. Yet all understood that the galaxy had changed, that revelation had left a mark deeper than any wound, and that endurance now carried a weight previously unknown. On Terra, Vale Threx closed the sealed tomes and stared into the emptiness where stars seemed to fold into themselves. The golden throne glimmered faintly, sustaining life, sustaining the Astronomican, but no longer demanding absolute devotion. Custodians patrolled, astropaths whispered prayers, and the Magos Mechanicus catalogued quietly, all performing duties that had shifted in meaning. History, prophecy, and memory had intertwined into a tapestry that no one could fully comprehend, yet all could feel. The Pale Witness had withdrawn, leaving questions unspoken, burdens unlifted, and possibilities unclaimed. The galaxy remained, trembling, altered, and eternally observing itself. And finally, in the void, dust from destroyed fleets, shattered worlds, and burned banners drifted silently across lightless expanses. The universe wept quietly in particles and memory, in echoes of devotion and absence. Faith remained, fragile but persistent. Survival endured, scarred and incomplete. The final question lingered. Does the soul of a galaxy survive when the light it followed has faltered? The answer, like the stars themselves, remained beyond comprehension. If you have witnessed these chronicles, stand with them. Remember, reflect, and bear witness. Like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments to honor the echoes of an age that may never speak again.